Hello, conference report. Thanks for the reply. Very, very interesting. Um, Actually wrote down a few things I thought I'd touch on. Um, First of all, in the graduate level study thing, I'm not taking you literally there. I think if you approach with humility, you could do it at any level, including a total ignorance, because you can say, "But I don't really know," just for I got from the popular, or maybe or were exposed to it through mystical teachers, and you're like, "I don't really know, but I know it's complicated." Okay, but even more so, I think. Well, this is a defense of my own thing. So, I took college level physics, enough to declare the major, and I went through all the classical physics pretty much, and into some classical mechanics. It was real dynamics where you have to take friction and things into account, all the complications, and an exposure to QM. Now, why I think I can actually use this pretty well is as a skeptic, I've looked for the limitations on our knowledge. The things we know we don't know, as well as the mistakes we made in the past, things we thought we knew and turned out to be wrong. Now, our knowledge about mistakes is much more certain than the interpretations we make about what our theories might mean in an active sense, right? So I think we can, for a skeptic, this is great because we keep collecting mistakes, which shows us the kinds of mistakes we make and that we do seem to keep making them. So the skeptic's theory that there will always be mistakes and therefore further questions and refinements to make in knowledge goes pretty well with the kind of evidence we get. Because sure enough, for every theory we have that's assertive, like they thought Newton's theory was the absolute truth for a long time, the skeptics can be patient for a couple hundred years and wait for the evidence that no, once again, there was something more to learn. Okay, and I take that from science. And I think we could do that quite well. Um, Also, there's a question of can somebody translate? If somebody does understand science, and I won't use my case necessarily, but let's take Kuhn. He understood science, and he's one of the rare, I would say, good philosophers of science. Um, can someone translate knowing the graduate level stuff, say, into something that's philosophically meaningful for the rest of us? And I kind of think, yeah. But I agree with you that in principle it can't be done, and we're really talking about people and movements that maybe go way over the line. And I think in the end maybe I'm going to be more tolerant than that, because like What the Bleep is a movie that I assume you're familiar with, that a lot of people, or you could be quickly, you know, say goes too far. I think it's a popularization. You know what I mean? I think can be dangerous, but it can also be sort of, when I was a kid, I saw things like that you know helped me be like I watch In Search of, that old show In Search of. If you ever knew that with Leonard Nimoy, and kind of a mystery show, and that sparks a curiosity. Though that's all a lot of Loch Ness monsters and various things like this, but some interesting things as well. Now it's funny. I was also thinking of Flatland as I said that, and that's a popularization. The movie of Flatland, if you've ever seen it, that's pretty accurate, pretty scientifically reliable way to introduce the subject. Okay, I've used it too much time, but whatever. I agree. I think the Darwin intuition is a really good example. And I also was going to use relativity. I think both Darwinian ideas are easier to get than quantum mechanics just because, there are parts that are intuitional. We didn't really think one animal type coming into another, but we had ordered and we know there's complexity. We understand that all dogs were similar, even though, we understood a lot of the patterns that now we call genetic relations. Um, and I also think that relativity, Darwinism is easier to kind of get than relativity. But as you point out, now it's like, of course it makes sense. How would you not have an evolution? What other kind of system? How would we come here? And everything's changing over time. It builds up, and of course we have this evolutionary process. Um, I think I'm kind of there with relativity. Probably not. You know, if somebody came from the future and tested me on how well I intuit the meaning of the general relativity, just on a human scale, not all the math. I mean, we don't intuit Newton's laws in the sense of understanding all the math either. It's just that we, feel that cause and effect in a qualitative sense, right? So we're talking about having that. And I think in terms of um, the time shifting, it does make sense to me because I just put the weight in relativity. The fact that if that wasn't true, then there would be some place that's the center of the universe. There would be a privileged location from which all facts, and that would mean that we could determine one set of facts and be objective, and that means the fascists would win because all they need to do is find that out, and then they could kill us for being wrong about which way to crack an egg because it'd be absolute. So I don't ever see that happening. So I'm glad the physics went in relativity, and I could see that, oh, well, the principle of relativity, holds, and we wouldn't have our own personalities if that weren't true. So one way or another, that's involved, and I kind of have an intuitive grasp of that, and that's something I've gotten through my life, which is also why I say it's probably minimal, because how much can you do in one lifetime, really? But also, it hasn't been that long since Darwin. If it just takes 5 or 6, 8 generations, that's pretty quick too, really, for the things we're talking about. And in the end, I think that's the thing about QM. I think it is going to be intuition, and I think it's almost it's a conceit of humans that we think that QM might be incomprehensible, just fundamentally, like we don't even have the right organs in the brain. You know what I'm saying? It's like, how could that be conceit? Because it's as if it were comprehensible in an ordinary way, with an ordinary brain, we would have done it. And the Darwin example shows, because as intuitive as the Darwinism is now, we see what blocks things from being intuitive even after you learn about them is other ideas, conflict. But God, it can't be. But wait, but God put us in that, and that conflict is what stops. So what kind of conflicts do we have in QM? In other words, I think we could probably understand QM if we just got rid of the conflicts, the untrue things that are conflicting. And I know that one is, I know that one is a rigid idea of cause and effect, and a different idea of what it means for something to be determined, for a cause to determine the effect. Okay, I know that it also has something to do with, on this quantum scale, there's a flood of many histories where all probabilities are done. And this is how Feynman did his calculations, and with the essence of his diagrams is the idea that a particle has a certain number of possible interactions it can do, a particle system. And the way to figure out what it's going to do is figure that it does all of them. And then through that process, you see what statistically is likely to happen, because they all interact, all these paths on the quantum scale. And you can magnify that quantum scale up to as big as you can, so long as you don't do this quantum disturbing. You don't observe it, you don't let outside photons and particles interact with it for a certain period of time, then the many histories thing makes sense, and it makes it feel more intuitive. Now, it's confusing because at the macroscopic level, what does that mean? The universe is splitting every time you split a coin? Well, no, we only know what's happening on the quantum mechanical level. So in terms of intuitiveness, it really only has to explain itself for these tiny periods when systems are not disturbed. Now, as with technology, we make those periods bigger and bigger and bigger, like it appears possibly leaves do with photosynthesis. Granted, it's going to get weird to figure out philosophically what's happening. On the other hand, we'll be able to tell. We'll do tests. We'll put a dog in a quantum thing, and we'll see if it's A and B, and records a video. Okay, I'm running out of time, but I'm going to make another one real quick and finish up.